Rashi in this week's Parsha raises the obvious question. Korach shepikeach hoya. Korach is not a fool. Korach is, he comes from aristocracy, and he is one of the leaders of his tribe, and he's a wise man. So mat ra lishtus kazu. So now what did he think here? After all the events in the desert, after all of the plagues, after the incense, after the rebellions, after everything, what does he think is going to happen here? How is he, so to speak, so blind not to realize what the consequences of his rebellion and behavior will be? So Rashi here quotes a medrash, interesting medrash. Eino hito aso. His eye fooled him. What does that mean, that his eye fooled him? So Rashi explains that he saw, that's what it means with his eye. He had a vision. He had a prophetic notion about the future of his generations, about who would stem from him. And he saw that it would be Shmuel Hanovi, because Shmuel was a Levi from the house of Korach. He was from the descendant of Bnei Korach Lo Mesu. So as we read in Tehillim, David HaMelech said, Moshe Aaron b'cho Hanov, u'Shmuel b'korei Shmo. That Shmuel is equal to Moshe and Aaron together. So he said, if that's my grandson, if I'm, so to speak, the progenitor of Shmuel Hanovi, and Shmuel Hanovi is equal to Moshe and Aaron, so then I have a right too. Then I should be the equal of Moshe and Aaron also. And therefore he says to them, "V'madua tisnasu al kal Hashem." Who gave you the right? You know, the Aaron's the Kohen. You're the Melech. You're in charge. You know, who gave you? So that's the idea of Eino hito aso. His eye, meaning his vision, how he saw the future. You know, I always remark that here in Shul, we have a member, Professor Aumann, who won the Nobel Prize for economics. So I always say that if that's the level of the membership in the synagogue, you can just imagine what the rabbi must be, right? So it depends how you look at it, right? So he said, if my grandson Shmuel Hanovi is Moshe Aaron b'cho Hanov Shmuel b'korei Shmo, so then I'm also entitled. So this opens up a very interesting matter of genealogy regarding how heaven looks at it. So we pride ourselves that we're Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and that our rights and our claims and who we are stem back thousands of years from three people who have long since departed from this world. But we're part and parcel of it. And therefore what they did influences us, and to a great extent the other way also, what we do influences how they are seen. If the Jewish people are the Jewish people, so then Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are great people. If God forbid the Jewish people are nothing, then who are they? So it's a symbiotic relationship. It goes up and down, backwards and forwards. And we find that in the Torah. Poker avon ovos albonim al shileshim val ribeim, that until 4 generations sin affects a family. Even though the 4th generation had nothing to do with the sin. So the Gemara says no, that it only affects if they don't do tshuva for that sin. But we see the effect that it has over generations. And la'alofim, it has, for positive things, for thousands of generations it has effect. So, a great extent, therefore, what happens to us currently, or what happens to us in our lives personally, is really reflective of things that occurred a long, long time ago, that we have no connection with, but that somehow influence us, and that somehow is part of the judgment and guidance that heaven visits upon us. So there's something very ironic in this week's parsha. The Torah is always ironic. The Torah always phrases it this way. What's the story with Shmuel? This week's Haftorah is Shmuel Hanovi. So Shmuel Hanovi serves the Jewish people from the time that he is an infant. He's raised in the house of Eli. Hannah gave him to be raised in the house of Eli, to be a Nazir, to be a Novi, and he was the judge, the last of the great judges of the Jewish people, and he is the one that will mark the beginning of the monarchy in the Jewish people. And Shmuel is one of the giants of Jewish history. But we read in the Haftorah that Shmuel suffers the same fate that Moshe suffered. And Moshe suffered it from Shmuel's grandfather, from Korach. Because Shmuel is, the people come and say, we want a king. We don't want you anymore. They didn't even want to make him emeritus. They don't want you anymore. And he says, Ubonai hoyu itchem. My sons are here. No, we don't want any. Forget it. We want to have a melech. We want to be like everybody else as a melech. Shmuel is faced with this rebellion, just as Moshe was faced with the rebellion of Korach, that they said to Moshe, we don't want you anymore.
It says, so to seem, doesn't it? I mean, that's a positive mitzvah or not?
Yeah, but that's not my discussion tonight. So the question is when, whom, how. And the truth of the matter is that if you look back in Jewish history, it never was a successful experiment. So Moshe says in this week's parsha, Lo chamor echad mehem nasosi. I never even took a donkey from them. When I came, it was on my expenses. I didn't take an expense account from the Jewish people. But the Gemara derives from here that a public leader is allowed to take his expenses. Because this was like a Maaseh Tzidkas by Moshe. So some leaders are machmir in this. But Moshe says, I didn't do any, lo chamor echad me'em nasosi, I never took. Shmuel says the same words. Hundreds of years later. Korach's descendant. He also says, lo chamor echad, I never took a donkey from them. So the irony of it is that Korach, through Shmuel, is placed in the same position that Moshe was, that he caused, that he brought about. And only the exquisite judgment of heaven, with all of its ironies and perfection, is able to adjust these things. Are you able to hear it later? Are you able to hear the echo of what Moshe said in desperation to try and deflect the criticism of Korach? And Shmuel now says in desperation, because he's trying to deflect the fact that he is being rejected by the Jewish people after all of his really a half century of service. So the Torah points that out to us. Torah paints the picture. And that has to do with generations, right? You see, the Korach influences later generations, just as Moshe certainly influences later generations. And what the Torah emphasizes, and we see it throughout Tanakh, is that these things repeat themselves. They're not one-offs. Korach is not a one-time story. And Shmuel Hanovi is also not a one-time story. And that therefore any understanding of public service in the Jewish world has to take this in account, has to realize that these are the realities of it. And therefore, that's the story of the generations. That's the story of Shileshim v'Ribeim, and that's the story of Alofim and Doros. It's all part of, we don't live only in our time. And it's not only what we do that, so to speak, puts the stamp on things, but that it's a continuing story and a continuing process, and that there's a great deal of irony to it. There's a great deal of retribution, if I could use that word, that the Torah is teaching us. And if it doesn't happen by the grandfather, it'll happen by the grandson. And that will put the grandson, Shmuel, in the same position as Moshe. And Korach is the one who assailed Moshe. Who are you to lord it over us? So I always say that all of us know that all of the wise things that we said to our parents when we were young, we are privileged to hear from our children when they are young. Because that's the recurring story. That's the book of life. That's Sefer Toldot Sodom. And the story of Korach is therefore very instructive as to a lot of things that go on in our society, a lot of things that go on in our world, even a lot of things that go on personally. You know, a person is blessed to have some sort of overview and vision on these things. So then more pieces of the puzzle fit, than they would otherwise. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratza Kodesh Baruch Hu Lezakas Yisrael V'fichach Yibra Lehem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Anoich Chavei Saman Tzidko Yagil Torah Yagil.